Alright, so right now there is a little event called the World Economic Forum, which is unfolding over in Davos, and this is essentially just a gigantic circle jerk of some of the most wealthy and powerful people in the world who get together to plot the destruction of the working class and try to map out how they are going to maintain their ever-slipping grip on the current neoliberal order of the world. So I got a breakdown here to start us off. We're going to show you some of these clips from Davos and exactly what some US politicians are saying, as well as just some of the things that they have mapped out for us in the future. And first, before we get to that, I just want to get into this notion that there are conspiracy theories surrounding the World Economic Forum, the head of it, this guy named Klaus Schwab, as well as just, this whole debate that is raging right now about how exactly to characterize what is currently happening. Now, surprise, surprise, the, corporate media outlets here like CBS News are doing absolutely no favors to anybody who wants to give a real structural critique of what these people are doing and how we have structured our systems economically, politically around the world. And they are basically trying to conflate valid critiques of global capitalism or globalism with some of the most deranged conspiracies that have been conjured up on the far right in this country. So here from CBS News, and this is just an absolutely amazing headline that they went with here. They say, as elites gather in Davos, conspiracy theories gain traction online. Now, first of all, okay, the word conspiracy doesn't have to mean something that is like fake, right? Because there are different variations of conspiracies. There's the conspiracies that are pushed by completely deranged people like Alex Jones when he says that, oh, Sandy Hook was a false flag, right? And he goes and he initiates the harassing of some of the families of the victims of that shooting, right? Those are the types of conspiracy theories that are entirely bullshit, entirely nonsense, not based in fact whatsoever. But there's another version of conspiracies, which are things that are just like describing how powerful people get together and coordinate in order to protect their place in the hierarchy. And this is an example of a real conspiracy, and they even describe it here in the first part of this headline, saying, as elites gather in Davos. It's like, what exactly do you think they are doing right now? Do you think that they genuinely are just trying to figure out what's best for, the working class around the world for the future or something like that? No, of course not. These are the richest billionaires in the world. These are the most powerful and corrupt politicians in the world. They're getting together as part of a conspiracy. It's just not a conspiracy in the way that a lot of fringe right-wing people have been portraying it, which gets into an entirely, broader conversation in terms of how a lot of very far-right people are actually undercutting the ability to seriously and meaningfully confront these structures, these institutions, these systems, because they're basically, making it out to seem like every single conspiracy theory or every single theory about what these people are doing here is equivalent to believing that, they want you to eat bugs in the future or something like that, right? So let's go ahead and get to some of this article, and I'll continue with that. They say, when some of the world's wealthiest and most influential figures gathered at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting last year, sessions on climate change drew high-level discussions on topics such as carbon financing and sustainable food systems. But an entirely different narrative played out on the internet, where social media users claimed leaders wanted to force the population to eat insects instead of meat in the name of saving the environment. Okay, so first of all, okay, a couple of different things here, right? Maybe there's some paper that they put out or some statements or, somebody said something about the potential for including insects in our diet in order to cut back on meat, and therefore through the incredibly polluting, production process that goes behind big agriculture and, these big meat packing plants as well, maybe we could cut some of that back and that would be better for the environment in the long run. Maybe there's something out there that describes that. But if you really genuinely believe that these people are going to confront the meat industry around the world right now, especially in the United States, that they are going to somehow dissolve that in its entirety and force everybody to start eating bugs at any point in the foreseeable future, that's just deranged, okay? That's not a valid conspiracy theory. It is one that is distracting from the core root of the issues here. And this is just another point that I want to make here. when these people are getting together, these are billionaires, these are corporate representatives, these are lobbyists, these are, big oil reps and all of that, right? These people are not getting together to seriously try to figure out how to have like sustainable food systems for the entire global population. Believe it or not, we already produce enough food to feed the entire population of the world easily, okay? The reason we cannot do that is the same reason why we have massive structural wealth inequality around the world and here in the United States. It's because of how we have structured our global economic systems, okay? Because we are a profit-driven society, there are some people who are going to be left behind. In this case, it happens to be millions and millions and millions of people who are starving around the world, but some people are going to be left behind as a part of these systems. It's inherent to what they are. It's the same reason why we can't or won't meaningfully address homelessness here in the United States. It's not because we don't have enough housing, it's because we have commodified our housing system, and we have to protect the profits of a lot of these wealthy landlords or corporations who own, wide swaths of the American housing market, okay? It's that simple, right? So the idea that like, oh, billionaires and corrupt politicians who are owned by billionaires are getting together to figure out how to, address climate change meaningfully and how to feed the world's population and address these issues. It's like, you are the ones who are causing these issues. The structures that have made you these wealthy and powerful elites are the same structures that are causing the problems you are pretending to solve, right? Okay, so that's the actual core issue here. It's not about whether or not they want you to eat bugs or whatever the fuck, okay? It's about entrenching their place in the hierarchy. But they continue down here, giving a couple more examples in terms of what's going on at Davos and, some of the conspiracy theories that have floated surrounding it. So they say the Great Reset. Hundreds of public sessions are planned, but the 4-day conference is also known for secretive backdoor meetings and deal makings by business leaders. I mean, again, go back up to the headline that was at the top of this article, right? As elites gather in Davos, conspiracy theories gain traction online. Well, maybe the reason, or at least part of the reason, why a lot of these not real or deranged conspiracies are able to gain traction is because you put out sentences like this and pretend as if there's not an actual conspiracy between these global elites going on. I mean, you just said it here, hundreds of public sessions are planned. Okay, so those are the public ones that we get to see, and I'm going to show you a couple clips here in a minute. But the 4-day conference is also known for secretive backroom meetings and deal making by business leaders. What is that except for a conspiracy? It is a conspiracy of capital. Okay, that's what that is. They say this gap between what's shown to the public and what happens behind closed doors, that makes the meeting a flashpoint for misinformation. And so they continue saying, theories about influential global leaders are not new, she said, but scrutiny of the forum and its chairman, Klaus Schwab, intensified in 2020 in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. That year, the theme of the annual meeting was the Great Reset, which is something we frequently hear from conservatives. The initiative envisioned sweeping changes to how societies and economies would work to recover from the pandemic and build a more sustainable future. So this is basically, they're describing like disaster capitalism essentially here. They say now, in increasingly mainstream corners of the internet and on conservative talk shows, the Great Reset has become shorthand for what skeptics say is a reorganization of society, which is pretty much what they just set up there, using global uncertainty as a guise to take away rights. Okay, that is not a made-up phenomenon there. This, again, is the concept of disaster capitalism, right? When you have some sort of an economic crash or a global pandemic, yes, of course, the entrenched powers are going to use that as an opportunity to further entrench their powers. That's not anything wild, but the specifics is where you get into a little bit of trouble here from the perspective of conservatives. They say believers argue that measures including pandemic lockdowns, which we barely even had here in the United States, and the ones that we did have were mostly under the Trump administration, but of course you're never going to hear that from the right wing in this country. But they say that pandemic lockdowns and vaccine mandates are tools to consolidate power and undercut individual sovereignty. Okay, so I mean, again, you could maybe make a stretch of an argument that like there were some cities or counties in the United States that, went way overboard with lockdowns and vaccine mandates. But I mean, I don't know about you guys. Personally, I never felt like there was any sort of like, extreme measures that were taken. If anything, I feel like people basically from close to the beginning of the pandemic, at least around me, weren't really giving a fuck and weren't even abiding by the rules rules that were actually in place. And we also didn't even have like stringent, hardcore vaccine mandates where everybody had to get vaccinated. In fact, it's a tiny minority of the population. I think it's somewhere between like 5 to 7% that have gotten their latest booster shot, even with a full court press coming from the Biden administration. So, I mean, you know, you could make some arguments here about like individual liberty or sovereignty or whatever the fuck. But again, the idea that like, oh, this is part of some broader conspiracy in order to use COVID to, you know, create some sort of like a global communist, ring here is completely deranged. And that's the type of rhetoric that you'll hear from the fringes of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, when she comes out and talks about corporate communism when describing the inherent monopolization process that is baked within the capitalist system. But again, it's not even just a misunderstanding of how these systems work or where your critique should actually be focused. It's more like intentional than that, right? And this is a tactic that is used by a lot of conservatives or, you know, corporations and, politicians as well, and talk show hosts on the right, is that they'll use hints of real things that are happening, conspiracies that have actually existed, and then use that to deflect people away from critiquing capitalism or critiquing the way that we have structured our economy, and push it towards things that are either like bullshit, culture war battles, or just completely unrelated to what the actual core critique of our systems should be. But they continue saying that extremist beliefs take root. So in a time of mounting anxiety, Jameson says that the public has become more susceptible to falsehoods as conspiracy theories emerge as a tool to cut through the chaos. Researchers who monitor extremism say these beliefs are becoming more popular and concerning. Again, maybe that wouldn't be happening if we actually had honest conversations about real conspiracies and real cabals, like the conspiracy and cabal of capital. And if we had real conversations about that, maybe people wouldn't be spiraling down these other rabbit holes. But they say at a rally staged on the grounds of an upstate New York church last fall, a photo of Klaus Schwab was displayed on the center of a large screen alongside other villains accused of threatening American values, and the crowd of thousands had gathered in a revivalist tent at a traveling roadshow used as a recruiting tool for an ascendant Christian nationalist movement, and participants discussed the Great Reset among a host of other theories as an assault on American foundations. I mean, again, we're talking about the wealthiest billionaires and corporate leaders in the world, okay? These people aren't exactly opposed to the economic philosophy of a lot of the Christian nationalist right wing in this country, to say the least. But they say the phrase was used more than 60 times across all programs on Fox News in 2022, the outlet that is, you know, somehow even more so than CNN and MSNBC, protecting of the billionaire class and corporate America. But they used it 60 times in 2022, according to one tally generated by the Internet Archive's TV news database, and that's up from 30 mentions back in 2021 and about 20 in 2020. And it was discussed most frequently on Laura Ingraham's show and Tucker Carlson's show as well, which again are like two people who are through and through stooges for the billionaire class in this country. So again, look at how they weaponize a lot of real situations of, you know, a cabal or of a conspiracy, and instead of critiquing capitalism or instead of critiquing the billionaire class or corporate America, they are directing this towards other angles like COVID culture wars and all of these other things, right? We'll finish off here. They say in August, amid a defamation trial for calling the Sandy Hook Elementary School attack a hoax, InfoWar host Alex Jones released a book called The Great Reset and the War for the World. It's described as an analysis of the global elite's international conspiracy to enslave humanity and all life on the planet. So, I mean, again, Alex Jones is a perfect example of what I was just describing there, where, you know, you basically have some guy who will say the most outlandish shit you could possibly imagine, and then every once in a while he'll throw something in there where he's critiquing Big Pharma or some, you know, corporation or something like that. And so that gets people to, you know, fall down this rabbit hole where they're like, oh, well, you know, I don't like Big Pharma, or I don't like X, Y, or Z, you know, large corporation in this country, or billionaire like George Soros or something in this country, who they mostly just don't like because they think they're like woke billionaires or woke corporations. But, you know, the point is that they'll take these, you know, substantive things and just completely twist them to deflect people away from that real critique. But now I want to get into some of the clips here from Davos itself. Okay, so here's the first one. This one is of Senator Chris Coons, I believe, from Connecticut, who is basically going to defend globalization and essentially, at its root, the exporting of potential American jobs overseas to exploit cheap labor. And they're going to do this under the guise of, like, claiming that it would somehow shave off growth for corporations, which maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but that's not really the point here. The point should be about boosting American jobs and improving the livelihoods of the American people. But no, they're focused more on the, profits of multinational corporations. So let's go ahead and watch about a minute of this clip here.
We know that there is a new House. There is also partly a new Senate. How far will the U.S. go in friendshoring, making sure that things goes to Mexico and countries that you're allied with? Do you see the point of the IMF managing director, and how will the U.S. balance this to make sure that we also will have growth in the years to come, and this will be a very shallow recession, if a recession at all?
Look, thank you for your comments and the opportunity. I do think that American leaders and business leaders in particular recognize that the severe disruptions of the pandemic and some of the challenges of the reach and the scope of globalization that have caused a backlash in many of our countries, a populist backlash, certainly in the United States, need to be addressed. One of the ways to deal with some of our challenges in terms of the hemisphere and migration also is to do some nearshoring to improve the job opportunities in Central America, for example. But I don't think it will be as robust as potentially projected. I do think that we will continue to have an open economy, to be committed to free trade, and to see the robust value that globalization has brought to the world as well as to many of our people.
I mean, come on, man. I mean, seriously. I mean, this is a guy who is a U.S. senator, right? And he's talking about how we need to essentially continue exporting jobs overseas and fucking the American people. For what? To maintain growth. And by growth in this context, they mean growing the profit margins of multinational corporations who are, again, going to other various countries instead of the United States so that they can exploit cheap labor. And his point there about, sending corporate America to all of these countries in Central and South America in order to create jobs to address the migration crisis. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous, man. We should be taking our boot off of the necks of these countries, and we should have been doing that over the last, 200, 300, 400 years or so that we've been in this hemisphere, taking our boot off of their necks in the form of, ending the war on drugs, which has done absolutely nothing to actually stop the flow of drugs in this country and has spread widespread violence across the entirety of Central and South America in many instances. Ending the war on drugs, I mean, lifting a lot of the sanctions on countries like Cuba and Venezuela and a couple others that are within our hemisphere as well, and, ending the blockade, the embargo on Cuba, and, all of these different things that we could actually do to help them to grow, to, maybe not meddle in their affairs, to maybe not back far-right fascist governments in Central and South America, to maybe not, support death squads that do terrorism against the civilian population and against organizing workers in Central and South America. I mean, so many different things, so many different critiques and, pieces of potential policies or, historical advice that we could get into in addressing what he just said about Central and South America, as if they need corporate America to go in to exploit their labor, to exploit their resources, and somehow that's going to solve these problems. I mean, it's completely fucking ridiculous. But that's just one example here, talking about how globalization, the exporting of jobs overseas, is actually amazing for the American people. Now, unfortunately, I do have to show you guys a clip here of Kirsten Sinema, the ghoul from Arizona, who of course just recently decided to up and leave the Democratic Party and identify as an independent. And really, when she says she's an independent, she basically just means she is completely independent from her actual constituents and is instead serving the interests of corporate America. But she had some things to say here about the Democratic Party. She had some things to say about the filibuster as well. So let's go ahead and listen to this clip here, and I apologize in advance because this shit is just absolutely infuriating.
Because since last time we met, you become an independent.
That's correct.
Happened that same day or the day after, didn't it?
So, as folks know, I have formally declared my independence from what I consider to be a deeply broken two-party system. Those who know me know.
Okay, sorry, quick pause here. the two-party system is a problem, right? But it's not just a problem that we have two political parties. If we had two political parties that were actually serving the interests of working class Americans, a broad coalition of the American people, that wouldn't be that big of a problem. It's not just that we have two political parties, okay, and that's the limitation of it. That is a problem, but the main problem here is that we have corrupt motherfuckers like you that completely run and are in power within our government that do not serve your constituents, okay? That's the actual problem. The problem is that we have a campaign finance system in the United States that allows corporations and billionaires to bribe politicians like you so that you don't serve the interests of the American people and you serve the interests of those billionaires and corporations. That's the actual underlying problem here. It's not just, oh, we have two political parties and by being one of the most corrupt members of the Senate, but labeling myself as an independent, I'm somehow breaking through that mold. No, you are literally a textbook example of the core rot, of the cancer within the American political system.
That I was always an independent voice and always have been for the things that I believe in and for my state and for my country. But I do think it's important to note that that what you've heard about partisanship, I believe, is accurate. You know, in the last 2 years, if we think, you know, January 6th, which is a horrible day from 2 years ago, created, I think, concern and fear for every patriotic American across the country. But in the resulting 2 years, the Democratic Party shared a narrative that said we would not have any more free and fair elections in this country if the United States Congress didn't eliminate the filibuster and pass a massive voting rights package. As we all know, the filibuster was not eliminated. Joe and I were not interested in sacrificing that important guardrail for the institution. That massive voting rights bill was not passed through Congress. And then we had a free and fair election all across the country. And as has been noted,
Okay, I gotta just cut it off there because I can't take any more of this. But there is already just so much that you could say about the statements that she just made. Okay, number one, yeah, the voting rights package did not get passed, but she basically has the most lib-rotted brain take of all time by turning around and pretending as if because Democrats barely squeaked through a win in the Senate because the Republican Party put up atrocious candidates, okay, it wasn't because they did anything amazing or anything like that, okay, Democrats barely won in the Senate, they lost in the House of Representatives during a midterm election season where a literal majority of the Republican candidates on the ballots across the country were election deniers. She thinks that situation means like, oh, whoopee, go to brunch everybody, we defeated fascism or all of the threats to democracy in the United States. I mean, it's completely fucking deranged. I mean, we still have, you know, this Supreme Court case on the potential for state legislatures to completely override the will of the people here in the United States and basically just send their own slates of electors. We still don't know what the final outcome of that is going to be, and she's turning around and pretending as if job done, and in the meantime also saying, well, look at us, we protected this important key institution of the filibuster and you know, managed to somehow survive at the end of the day. First of all, it's not just about voting rights reform, which we obviously need in this country. We need a complete overhaul, especially on things like campaign finance in this country. But it's not just about like voting rights reform. It's also about every other policy that the filibuster has been standing in the way of. The filibuster was initially used primarily by segregationists back in the day in order to preserve those institutions. Okay, so this is not something that is intended to protect democracy in the long run. It's doing the exact opposite of that. The filibuster is inherently anti-democratic. It means you need basically close to a supermajority in order to pass anything through the Senate, and we know that nothing that actually serves the interests of working class Americans is going to get through that filibuster mark. So that's exactly why she wants to keep that, you know, protected institution in place. That's the only reason. It's because it gives her cover in order to not enact policies that are supported by a wide majority of her own constituents. I mean, it's literally that simple. But not only did she say this, but then we also got this moment where she high-fived Joe Manchin after celebrating that they killed potential filibuster reform here.
Difference for the American people in the last 2 years.
We still don't agree on getting rid of the filibuster.
That's correct.
Thank you. I was
I mean, just absolute demon shit. The biggest demons on the planet right now. But we also had this, okay, breaking away from Sinema and Manchin because I can't even talk about them anymore. Breaking away from that, here from Ken Klippenstein to finish us off. He says, the World Economic Forum is saying we desperately need to disrupt our approach to retirement savings. So they're basically trying to say like, oh, we're being disruptive, right? This is like how, you know, econ or Silicon bros, you know, Silicon Valley bros and tech bros use this language as well. Like we're being super disruptive, and then it's just like basically like exploiting gig workers or something like that. They're using this in a similar way, right? We desperately need to disrupt our approach to retirement saving, and this is what they're actually saying. They say many people will want to work past mandatory retirement age. Others will need to work longer to remain financially resilient later in life. Okay, so listen, here's the real conspiracy that's going on here, okay? We have a global capitalist system. We here in the United States live in the center, the most powerful, country in the world, the most powerful economy in the world. We live in the center of that global capitalist system. This meeting at Davos is just a gigantic, again, circle jerk for the wealthiest and most powerful politicians, business leaders, CEOs, executives, billionaires, all of these people, lobbyists. They get together to basically collude in order to protect their place in the hierarchy while doing all of these virtue signals about climate change and fair economic justice and all this and that they have no intention of actually meaningfully going about addressing with those issues that they talk about. And it is literally just a smokescreen for them to protect and entrench their place within this capitalist global hierarchy. Okay, so that's what this event is. You don't need, to all of the right-wing people who may be somehow still watching this video or something, you don't need all of these other conspiracy theories about like bug eating or, like a global pedophile ring or whatever the fuck it may be on any given day. You don't need all of those other conspiracy theories because the conspiracy is happening directly in front of your face. So try to direct that anger, try to direct that energy towards giving a critique of the capitalist system.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying